What if the universe isn't as silent as we've always believed? Picture this. You're adrift in the vast emptiness of space, surrounded by nothing but the blackness of the cosmos. Then, a strange sound disrupts the silence. A faint signal, like a whisper carried by the winds of space. It's weak, but unmistakable. A cry for help. From across the stars. Who is it? What are they asking for? And more importantly, who will answer? The universe is so large, so incomprehensibly vast, that it often feels like we're the only ones here. But the reality is, space might not be as empty as we think. For centuries, humanity has looked up at the night sky, yearning for connection with something beyond our own world. From the ancient stargazers to modern astronomers, we've searched for signs, hoping to answer one of the most profound questions we've ever asked. Are we alone in the universe? But what if the answer came, not in the form of a message of greeting, but as a desperate call for help? This is the story of the moment humanity made its mark on the galactic stage, not with military force or technological superiority, but with something far more powerful: the willingness to help, to reach out, to answer the call of those in need, no matter the cost. Before we dive deeper into this epic tale, let's talk about how the search for extraterrestrial life has been a part of human history. For decades, astronomers have been listening to the cosmos with radio telescopes, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything, that could indicate we're not alone. The search for alien life is rooted in the belief that, given the immense size of the universe, it's statistically improbable that Earth is the only planet to harbor intelligent life. The famous WOW signal, detected in 1977, is one of the most well-known examples. A radio burst of unknown origin that sparked intense debate about the possibility of alien communication. Despite decades of searching, however, no message has ever been definitively identified as proof of extraterrestrial life, until now. In the year 2057, humanity's space exploration capabilities had advanced to a point where we weren't just sending probes to distant planets. We were actively sending ships beyond our solar system, scanning for signals and signs of intelligent life. Our technology had evolved, and our reach into the stars had expanded. By then, humans had begun establishing colonies on distant planets and moons, paving the way for future generations to spread across the galaxy. We had begun to map out regions of space that were once unreachable, charting stars, planets, and black holes. But in the midst of this grand exploration, something remarkable happened. Humanity received a signal, a transmission that was unlike anything we had ever encountered. It wasn't a simple radio wave or a random burst of cosmic noise. It was coherent. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was clearly artificial, and it had a specific purpose: to reach us. A distress call. The message had traveled across light years to reach Earth, and it was a message of desperation. A civilization, somewhere deep in the galaxy, was asking for our help. But what could this civilization want from us? Why had they reached out to humanity, of all species? The first question that came to mind was, why us? Why would a technologically advanced alien species send a cry for help to humans? The answer lies in humanity's history and our unique characteristics. For centuries, we've been driven by an insatiable desire to explore and to help others. Unlike many species that might seek power or dominance, humans have long exhibited an instinct to protect, to offer aid, and to venture into the unknown. We've faced countless challenges throughout our history, overcoming obstacles that might have extinguished lesser civilizations. And so, when faced with a dying civilization in need, we answered. Because in many ways, helping others is hardwired into our very DNA. The distress signal we received wasn't just a plea for help. It was a desperate attempt by an alien race facing extinction to survive. Their world was dying, and they had exhausted every possible means of saving themselves. Their technology had failed them, and they were running out of time. There was no one left to turn to, except us. And in their final fleeting moments of existence, they did the one thing they could think of. They called out to humanity, hoping that we would hear them, hoping that we would answer. The transmission itself was filled with encoded messages, fragments of information, and pleas for assistance. The alien civilization had suffered a catastrophic collapse. Natural disasters, wars, and a rapidly deteriorating environment had brought them to the brink of annihilation. Their technology, once advanced beyond imagination, had faltered, and their once prosperous world was now little more than a dying husk. They had reached a critical point where their survival was no longer possible without outside intervention. They had one last hope: humanity. But why would they think that we could help? The answer is simple. The alien civilization had been monitoring our progress for years, watching as humanity made its way into the stars. They had seen the resilience and ingenuity of our species, and they believed, rightly or wrongly, that we could offer them the help they so desperately needed. Humanity, despite our flaws, had a reputation for overcoming the impossible. And in the face of this unprecedented crisis, the question was no longer whether we could help, it was whether we would. The situation was dire. This wasn't just a simple rescue mission. It was a galactic-scale humanitarian effort, one that would test the very limits of human ingenuity and perseverance. It wasn't just about saving a single planet or species. It was about saving an entire civilization from extinction. But before we could make any plans, there was one more question we had to answer. What exactly were we walking into? What kind of danger would we face when we arrived? And would we be prepared for the consequences of stepping into the unknown? Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Right now, HFY Chronicles-849 is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you enjoy unraveling the mysteries of the universe, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us grow this community together. In the next section, we'll explore the intricacies of the alien civilization's plight and what it would take for humanity to answer the call. But first, consider this. What if this happened to you? What if you were the one reaching out, hoping someone would hear you? Now that humanity had received the distress call, the weight of what lay ahead began to settle in. The message was clear, but the road to answering it was anything but simple. There were so many questions to address, so many unknowns to consider. The first task was to understand who or what had sent the signal and why they had chosen us. In the vastness of the galaxy, why had a species so advanced turned to humans for salvation? The alien civilization was known as the Toravans, and their home planet, once a thriving world of immense technological and cultural advancements, was now on the brink of collapse. They were a species that had mastered the art of interstellar travel and energy manipulation, and for centuries they had been a dominant force in their corner of the galaxy. Their knowledge of space was unparalleled, and they had even discovered how to harness the power of black holes for energy. Yet, despite their technological prowess, they had faltered in the most fundamental way. They had ignored the fragility of their environment. The Toravans' downfall began with a series of planetary-scale disasters. Climate change, war, and a massive energy crisis had pushed their civilization to the brink. What was once a utopian society, with cities gleaming in the light of distant suns, now lay in ruin. Their oceans had turned to acid, their skies filled with toxic gases, their agricultural systems failed, and their once thriving population had dwindled to a fraction of its original size. Despite their advanced technology, they had failed to predict the consequences of their own actions, and now they were paying the ultimate price. For years, the Toravans had been struggling to keep their society together. They tried everything from terraforming their planets to developing new forms of energy. But it was too little, too late. Their environment was beyond saving, and their once great cities were now crumbling. They had turned to space, seeking help from other civilizations, but their calls for aid went unanswered. It was then that they turned to the humans of the future, hoping that we, the up-and-coming explorers of the galaxy, would be the ones to offer salvation. At first, many in the scientific community were skeptical. How could a species so advanced, so capable of incredible feats of technology, need our help? The Toravans were far beyond our level of understanding when it came to space travel and energy systems. We had only recently begun exploring beyond our solar system, and here they were, asking for our assistance. Yet, as the message was decoded, the stark reality of their situation became undeniable. The Toravans had reached the end of their resources. Their last hope lay with humanity. And they knew it. The message contained a detailed plea for help, including blueprints for their advanced technology, a description of their dying planet, and a map of their galaxy. The Toravans explained that their energy system, based on harnessing black hole power, had collapsed. A catastrophic failure of their core reactor had sent shockwaves throughout their planet, disrupting their gravity and causing severe tectonic activity. Their once stable orbit had begun to decay, and they were running out of time before their planet was torn apart completely. They needed a solution, and they needed it quickly. But what could humanity do? We had barely begun to develop interstellar travel, let alone advanced energy systems that could rival the Toravans' technology. The reality of their situation set in. We were dealing with a problem on a scale that no human civilization had ever faced. This wasn't a simple rescue mission. This was a desperate race against time to save an entire species from extinction. The gravity of the situation was overwhelming. What if we failed? What if we couldn't solve their problems? The fear of the unknown gnawed at the hearts of those tasked with responding. But even in the face of such uncertainty, humanity's resolve remained unshaken. One of the first steps was assembling a team of the best minds from Earth, Mars, and our colonies in the outer solar system. A coalition of scientists, engineers, military strategists, and diplomats was formed to design a plan of action. It would be a monumental task, requiring the combined efforts of humanity's finest and a level of cooperation never before seen in human history. But this was no time for division. The fate of an entire civilization rested on their shoulders. The team quickly realized that the Toravans' technology, though advanced, was not completely beyond our understanding. The principles behind their black hole energy system were complex, but not entirely foreign. Humanity had been experimenting with similar concepts for decades, studying the potential of harnessing exotic matter and quantum energy sources. The challenge was not just theoretical, it was practical. Could we build the necessary infrastructure to fix their energy crisis? Could we stabilize their planet before it fell into the gravitational pull of its dying star? The team decided that the best course of action was twofold. We would send a team to the Toravan homeworld to assess the damage firsthand and assist with the repair efforts, while at the same time, we would begin developing a new energy source capable of stabilizing their reactor and halting the planet's orbital decay. The task seemed insurmountable, but the Toravans had given us hope. They had laid out everything we needed to know: their technology, their history, and most importantly, their trust in humanity. But as the preparations for the mission began, questions arose. How would we communicate with the Toravans, who had developed their own unique language and culture? How would we gain their trust? And perhaps most pressing of all, would we even be able to survive the journey? The distance between Earth and the Toravan homeworld was staggering, nearly 1,000 light-years. Our fastest ships could reach only a fraction of that distance within a reasonable time frame. We would need to innovate quickly if we were to save them in time. The decision was made. Humanity would go. We would send a fleet of ships to their world, prepared to tackle their energy crisis head-on and assist them in stabilizing their planet. This was not just a rescue mission. It was humanity's first true test in the interstellar age, a trial that would determine whether we could rise to the challenges of the galaxy and prove ourselves worthy of being the saviors of an alien civilization. The journey ahead would be perilous. No one knew what awaited us in the dark depths of space. But one thing was clear: humanity was ready. We would answer the call, no matter the cost. But what awaited us on the other side? Was the Toravan civilization truly beyond saving? Or was this a problem that humanity could overcome? The galaxy was waiting, and humanity's place in it was about to be forged in the crucible of a distant, dying world. The first wave of humanity's response to the Toravan crisis was nothing short of a monumental undertaking. To undertake a journey to a distant world, 1,000 light-years away, would push the limits of human technology, resource management, and endurance. No longer were we merely an earthbound species. We were now explorers, tasked with navigating the uncharted expanse of the galaxy in a way that had never been done before. This mission would require the best minds, the most advanced ships, and a cooperation between nations and colonies that had never been seen before in human history. The first priority was developing the right ships for the task. Despite our advancements in space travel, we had yet to build a ship capable of making the long journey across the stars within a human lifetime. Traditional propulsion systems were inadequate for such a massive undertaking. For a mission of this magnitude, something entirely new was needed. The solution came in the form of a revolutionary propulsion system, the quantum slipstream drive. This technology harnessed the power of quantum entanglement and exotic matter to fold space itself, effectively shortening the distance between 2 points in space. It was a leap in technology so great that it seemed almost like science fiction, but it was our only hope if we were to reach the Tarivan homeworld in time to make a difference. However, the quantum slipstream drive was still in its experimental phase. There were no guarantees that it would work, or that it would even be safe for crew members to use. Its first tests had been successful on a small scale, but no one had ever attempted to push it to its limits. The stakes were high. If the drive malfunctioned or failed mid-flight, the ships would be stranded in the vast emptiness of space. The risk was undeniable, but the mission to save the Tarivans and perhaps secure humanity's place among the stars was too important to delay. The ships were being constructed at breakneck speed, with a fleet of 10 advanced spacecraft being assembled for the journey. Each ship would carry a mix of scientists, engineers, medical personnel, military officers, and diplomatic specialists. Essentially, humanity's best and brightest, each of whom was committed to ensuring the survival of the Tarivans and securing humanity's future. As the ships were being readied, the team's leadership began organizing their strategy. This wasn't just about reaching the Tarivan homeworld. It was about how to approach a situation that was so much more complex than any mission Earth had ever undertaken. The Tarivans were an ancient, highly advanced civilization, and humanity's knowledge was still developing. How would we communicate with them? How could we offer help without appearing as conquerors or colonizers? We needed to tread carefully. Diplomacy would be just as important as technology in this mission. The arrival of the fleet in the Tarivan system was only the first step. The Tarivan homeworld was located in the Hades system, a binary star system with intense radiation and gravitational anomalies. The planet itself, once a blue and green orb of beauty, was now a dying, battered world. The atmosphere was thin, and violent storms raged across its surface. The cities that had once been thriving metropolises were now ghostly ruins, shrouded in dust and smoke. It was a somber sight, a reminder of the fragility of even the most advanced civilizations. Upon arrival, the fleet was immediately met with the Tarivans' desperate call. They had prepared for humanity's arrival, having sent ships to intercept and guide us through the turbulent space around their planet. The Tarivans had barely managed to keep their population alive in the face of planetary destruction, and they were ill-prepared to deal with the immediate collapse of their infrastructure. However, they were relieved and grateful for humanity's willingness to intervene. It was a humbling experience for the crew, the realization that, for all our technology, we were still human, capable of compassion and a willingness to act in the face of unimaginable odds. The fleet's first task was to stabilize the planet's orbit and prevent further decay. This was no simple matter. The Tarivan energy systems, though advanced, had become unstable. Their core reactor, the source of the planet's energy and gravity regulation, had begun to fail catastrophically. Without it, the planet would eventually drift into the gravitational pull of its dying star, leading to an irreversible collapse. The task before humanity's engineers was monumental. We needed to find a way to stabilize the energy systems and prevent the planet from being torn apart. To do this, the fleet deployed a series of experimental energy transfer devices designed to interface with the Tarivan reactor. These devices were built to channel the enormous energy output from the black hole-powered reactors and redirect it into stabilizing forces that would arrest the planet's decay. But the challenge was not just technical, it was also a race against time. The Tarivans had told us that they only had a few months before their world would reach a critical tipping point. With each passing day, the gravitational anomalies on the planet grew more intense and the instability worsened. Meanwhile, a team of scientists and diplomats worked with the Tarivan leadership to assess the full extent of the planetary damage. The Tarivans had once been a society of peace, focused on exploration and intellectual pursuits, but now their world had become a desperate battleground for survival. Humanity's involvement was not just technical, it was deeply humanitarian. The Tarivans needed us, But they also needed our moral support. They needed to feel that they weren't alone. In their struggle, the human presence on their world was a beacon of hope in their darkest hour. On the surface, the situation was dire. The Turivans had already lost many of their most significant cities to tectonic shifts, and the remaining population lived in underground bunkers and research facilities. The human team was split into two groups, one focusing on the energy stabilization project, and the other on aiding the Turivans in their recovery efforts. It was a delicate balance between technological intervention and cultural sensitivity. Our engineers and scientists worked tirelessly, but we knew that our success was not guaranteed. Even with our best efforts, the Turivan homeworld could still fall into ruin. But humanity had a reputation for resilience. In the face of adversity, we had always found a way to overcome the impossible. The clock was ticking, and each passing moment brought new challenges. But even as the Turivan world began to stabilize, a new question emerged. What would become of their civilization? Would they survive this crisis? Or was their extinction inevitable? The answer to that question would depend not just on our technology, but on something more. It would depend on humanity's ability to come together and rise to the occasion. The turning point came when the quantum slipstream technology was successfully deployed to redirect the remaining energy in the Turivan reactor. It wasn't a perfect solution, and the immense power surging through the energy channels was dangerous. But humanity had proven its ingenuity once again. The initial tests were promising. The stabilizers began to function, halting the worst of the planetary collapse. The planet's atmosphere slowly began to regenerate, its thin veil thickening just enough to protect the remaining life on the surface. The gravitational anomalies, though still present, became less erratic. Humanity had bought the Turivans a lifeline, but the question remained, for how long? The stabilization process wasn't an instant success. The Turivan core, a once reliable source of energy, had suffered extreme wear and tear over centuries. Even with humanity's cutting-edge technology, it took weeks of continuous work to maintain the delicate balance necessary to keep their planet alive. The crew aboard the human ships didn't rest. Time was against them. They worked in shifts, around the clock, constantly refining their methods, modifying their tech, and finding new ways to optimize the stabilization efforts. The engineering teams were challenged not just by technical problems but also by the reality that the entire future of an entire civilization rested on their hands. However, as time progressed, the effects of the damage to the Turivan homeworld became more evident. Even with the stabilization efforts working, the planet itself had suffered immense trauma. Entire ecosystems had collapsed. Entire species of flora and fauna were now endangered, with many already gone. Cities were now nothing more than skeletal ruins, and entire populations had been decimated. The survivors, though grateful for humanity's intervention, now faced a new challenge: rebuilding a civilization from the ashes. Humanity had given them hope, but hope alone wasn't enough to restore the heart of the Turivan species. Humanity's next task became clear: aid in the rebuilding process. The mission had shifted from stabilization to rehabilitation. This was not just about ensuring survival, it was about offering a new beginning. While the stabilization technology could hold off the worst of the planetary destruction, it couldn't reverse the damage that had already been done. The cities, once towering spires of metal and glass, would need to be rebuilt, but the Turivans had no knowledge of how to do so. Their entire way of life had been based on their advanced technology, and with their energy core near collapse, many of their systems had fallen into disarray. Humanity's engineers set to work developing modular housing and infrastructure systems that could be adapted to Turivan needs. It wasn't an easy task. The Turivan design philosophy was unique. Everything from their homes to their factories was built to adapt seamlessly with their environment, relying on sustainable energy methods and eco-conscious construction. Humanity had to learn how to align these systems with the human design technologies we had brought with us, creating a hybrid solution that would allow the Turivans to regain their footing while preventing further ecological damage. Meanwhile, our scientists worked with the Turivans to devise solutions to the environmental catastrophe that had befallen their world. The dying ecosystems would need to be restored, but that could only happen if the planetary system as a whole could be saved. humanity's experience with terraforming, though relatively limited, offered valuable insight. We needed to assist the Terivans in regaining their ability to grow crops and harvest resources. The issue wasn't just rebuilding cities. It was about rebuilding a functioning, sustainable environment capable of supporting future generations. At the same time, diplomats from humanity began working closely with Turivan leadership to understand their social structures and their culture more deeply. The Terivans were a deeply intellectual and peaceful species, once focused solely on expanding their knowledge of the universe. But now their civilization was on the brink of extinction. The question wasn't just about saving their planet. It was about saving the essence of who they were as a people. Could they recover from this catastrophe and regain the spacefaring society they once were? Could they rebuild their knowledge and infrastructure in time to prevent the collapse of their cultural heritage? The answer, at least in the beginning, was unclear. There were too many uncertainties. The Terivans were not accustomed to war or conquest. They had never had to defend their civilization from external threats. They had thrived in peaceful isolation, relying on their intelligence and peaceful values to guide them. But now, with their world shattered and their resources dwindling, they needed humanity's help more than ever. They needed not just technical expertise, but cultural guidance, leadership, and an understanding of what it meant to rebuild a society in the face of overwhelming adversity. For the first time, humanity found itself in the role of mentor, guiding a species that had once been its superior in some ways. The moral complexities of this situation weighed heavily on everyone involved. How much of ourselves should we give in our efforts to help them rebuild? Were we in danger of imposing our way of life on them? Were we becoming the very thing we had fought against in the past, an invasive species, a conqueror? These were questions that humanity had to confront, and they were not easily answered. Despite these complexities, a remarkable thing began to happen. Over time, the Terivans began to show signs of hope, signs that their species could recover. They worked alongside humans, learning new ways to harness sustainable energy sources, revive their devastated ecosystems, and re-establish their cities. They weren't just surviving. They were adapting, evolving, and finding new ways to thrive. The partnership between humanity and the Terivans became a symbol of unity in the face of disaster. The Terivans, though struggling, had found a new hope in their humanity-driven neighbors. The once crippled species had been given the tools to rise from the ashes. In the midst of this, however, another layer of the problem began to unfold. While humanity and the Terivans worked together to rebuild, an unforeseen threat began to emerge from the dark reaches of the galaxy. A shadow, lurking just beyond the edge of known space, began to stir. A force that could shatter everything humanity and the Terivans had worked so hard to build. The question that now hung over everything was this: could the fragile peace they had forged withstand this new looming threat? As the rebuilding efforts continued on the Terivan homeworld, humanity's engineers and scientists began to notice subtle anomalies in the fabric of space-time surrounding the planet. It wasn't just the environmental restoration or the stabilization of the planetary core that posed challenges anymore. There was something else, something insidious, lurking just beyond the farthest reaches of the Terivan star system. The deep, unnerving silence of space had been broken, but not by the expected allies. Instead, a series of strange, untraceable signals began to appear on the fringes of the system, faint but unmistakable. The origin of the signals was impossible to pinpoint, but their pattern was eerily similar to known signatures from an ancient and largely forgotten civilization, one whose existence was shrouded in mystery and whose potential for destruction was immense. Humanity's first response was one of caution. The signals didn't appear to be hostile at first, but there was no mistaking the chilling sense that something was waiting in the dark, observing. The Terivans had long since abandoned the pursuit of military technology, focusing instead on intellectual and scientific endeavors. They were not prepared for a new conflict. Humanity, however, was different. Over the years, humanity had become adept at defending itself. The recent experiences with the Anar invasions had made it clear that humanity would not be caught off guard again. As the mysterious signals continued to broadcast across space, the joint task force between humans and Terivans began to assemble. But even as they prepared, uncertainty loomed over them. Who or what was on the other side. The Tarivan government, still reeling from the collapse of their world, was hesitant to believe that the signals could indicate an imminent threat. After all, their records showed no mention of such a civilization, and the Tarivans had never been a species to entertain superstition or paranoia. Yet, human scientists were far more aware of the implications. History was filled with examples of seemingly peaceful civilizations whose tragic downfall came at the hands of unknown forces. And as humanity's intelligence agencies decoded more of the strange signals, they began to recognize patterns of long-lost technologies, signatures of an ancient species that had vanished millennia ago, leaving only echoes of their power. These signals weren't random, they were deliberate, crafted in ways that only an advanced civilization could manage. The humanity-led task force moved quickly, establishing an orbital defense perimeter around the Tarivan homeworld. The goal was not to provoke, but to ensure that if the signals were a precursor to something far darker, they would be ready. The technology that humanity had developed since the last Great War was formidable, but there was no guarantee that it would be enough. After all, this was not a threat they had expected. This wasn't just another hostile species bent on conquest. It was something far older, possibly far more dangerous. The questions began to mount. Were these signals a warning? A call to arms? Or perhaps a lure? An invitation to something far worse? In a council meeting convened between human diplomats, military leaders, and Tarivan officials, the debate raged. The Tarivans were hesitant to escalate. They were a peaceful species after all, not prone to unnecessary aggression. But humanity understood that sometimes, in the cold vastness of space, peace could be a fleeting illusion. Some suggested sending a reconnaissance team to the source of the signals, while others pushed for an immediate strike before any potential threat could manifest. No matter what, the time for passive observation had ended. It was clear that something or someone was out there, and humanity wasn't about to leave the Tarivans vulnerable again. The decision was made. A combined fleet of human warships and Tarivan reconnaissance vessels would journey into the unknown, to the far reaches of their galaxy where the signals had originated. Equipped with stealth technology, advanced scanners, and battle-ready armaments, this fleet would venture into the uncharted space between galaxies, a region of space that had long been considered desolate, devoid of life. What they found there would change everything. As the fleet prepared to depart, the mood was a mixture of apprehension and resolve. For the Tarivans, this was an uncharted and terrifying frontier. They had never ventured beyond the borders of their system with any intent to confront threats. Their world was one of peace and discovery, not conflict. But humanity, in its own way, had been forged by the fires of war, its soldiers tempered by the realities of survival. They understood that sometimes survival meant taking the fight to the enemy before the enemy had a chance to strike. The Taravans, although reluctant, had no choice but to trust their human counterparts. Their world had already been shattered once. They could not afford to allow it to happen again. As the fleet entered the unknown region of space, the sheer vastness of the universe became apparent. They passed through nebulae of vibrant gas clouds, massive stars burning at the edges of their vision, and barren, lifeless planets that had long since ceased to be of any interest to the galaxy at large. And then they found it, the source of the signals. A massive, seemingly abandoned space station drifted in the void, its surface marked by scars of battle long past. The design was unlike anything either species had encountered before. Sleek, angular, with an architecture that spoke of a time and people lost to history. This station, though silent, was far from inactive. As the fleet approached, powerful electromagnetic pulses began to radiate outward, disrupting the scanners and systems on the ships. The station had been waiting for them. The eerie silence that had enveloped the mission was broken by the unmistakable sound of an automated signal. The first clear communication from the station. Humanity. Tarivan. We have been waiting. The message was chilling, but also familiar. The station's message wasn't one of aggression, but of invitation. It was a call, but also a challenge. The question that remained was, who or what had sent it, and why? Had humanity and the Toravans unwittingly stumbled upon an ancient power that had been dormant for centuries. Or was there something far more malevolent behind it? In the face of this ominous revelation, the fate of both humanity and the Toravans now rested on their next moves. The unknown had now been thrust upon them. They had only two choices: engage with the station and discover the truth of its origins, or turn back, knowing that to leave might mean abandoning the opportunity to understand a potentially game-changing force. As the fleet hovered in the cold darkness of space, the signal from the abandoned station continued to pulse, its message both cryptic and tantalizing. The automated transmission spoke of waiting for humanity, waiting for the Toravans, but waiting for what? For centuries the station had been dormant, but now, with the arrival of these two very different civilizations, it had come to life. The question that hung in the air, as thick and suffocating as the void itself, was whether this waiting was a welcoming gesture or a harbinger of something much darker. Humanity's fleet commander, General Sarah Kincaid, a battle-hardened veteran of numerous campaigns, stood on the command bridge of the lead warship. Her eyes scanned the holographic display in front of her, detailing the layout of the station. Despite her years of experience, she felt a deep unease, a sense that they were standing at the edge of something far beyond their comprehension. The Toravans were equally unsettled. They had long prided themselves on their intellectual pursuits and peaceful nature, but their knowledge of warfare was limited compared to that of humanity. Their once unchallenged belief that the universe was mostly a peaceful place had been shattered by the invasion of the Anar, and now they were confronted by something far older and more enigmatic. The station itself was a marvel of alien engineering, its surface covered in strange symbols that pulsed with an unnatural energy. The energy readings were off the charts, fluctuating wildly as if the station were not only waiting for them, but actively testing their presence. Every time a Toravan vessel or human warship came too close, the electromagnetic pulses intensified, forcing the ships to maneuver carefully to avoid system overloads. The whole situation felt like a game, one in which they were the unwitting pawns. But it wasn't just the technology that was unsettling, it was the implications. If this station had been waiting for humanity and the Toravans, then why had it been silent for so long? What was its true purpose? After several tense hours of deliberation, General Kincaid made a decision, one that was as risky as it was necessary. She would board the station herself, along with a small team of elite soldiers and Toravan diplomats. The goal was to make contact to uncover the secrets behind the station, and to determine whether the message was a genuine invitation or a trap. The stakes couldn't have been higher. The future of both species rested on this one mission. As the shuttle carrying Kincaid's team approached the station, a deep silence settled over the entire fleet. Outside, the station loomed larger, its jagged silhouette contrasting starkly with the swirling beauty of the nebulae beyond. The ship's engines hummed softly, but inside, a tension so thick it was almost tangible gripped the crew. They had no idea what awaited them. The station's inner workings had been locked down by its unknown creators for eons, and they had no idea how the station might react to their intrusion. The shuttle docked with the station's outer docking bay, a cavernous space filled with debris and long-forgotten remnants of once-active machinery. The atmosphere was heavy, as though the very walls of the station breathed with a kind of ancient life. The air was stale and cold, the corridors empty. But the strangest thing of all was the silence. No crew, no inhabitants, nothing. Just a dark, abandoned structure that seemed to stretch for miles. Kincaid's mind raced as she processed the gravity of what was being asked of them. For centuries, humanity had fought to carve out a place for itself in the stars, driven by ambition, survival, and the unyielding desire to thrive. But this was something entirely different. This wasn't about territorial conquest or military supremacy. This was about keeping the very fabric of the galaxy intact, protecting not just one civilization or another, but all of life itself. The room fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the soft hum of the Iskanar's energy. Kincaid exchanged a glance with her Toravan counterpart, High Counselor Erelath. The Toravans, who had once considered themselves peaceful intellectuals, now stood on the precipice of something far beyond their understanding. For centuries, they had believed their greatest strength was their wisdom, their ability to negotiate, to solve problems through diplomacy. But now, they were being thrust into a conflict that demanded something more, a readiness to fight, to protect, to wield power in ways they had never imagined. Humanity has faced many trials before, Kincaid said, her voice cutting through the silence. But this is different. We're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting for the future of the galaxy. And I can't do this alone. We can't do this alone. Her eyes flicked to Ariloth. We need your people. We need everyone. Together, we stand a chance. Ariloth nodded, his usually calm demeanor now marked with a sense of determination. The Terivans have always believed in the power of knowledge, he said. But we know now that knowledge alone will not keep the galaxy safe. We must unite our strengths. If we are to pass the Iskanar's trial, we must fight with everything we have. And so, the alliance was solidified. Humanity and the Terivans, two species so different yet bound by the same fate, had to set aside their differences and come together to face what lay ahead. The Isknar had given them a glimpse into the galaxy's darkest corners, a warning of the dangers that lurked in the unseen depths. The trial would not be easy. It would not be without sacrifice. But they had no choice. The galaxy's survival depended on it. The Iskanar's energy form flickered, and their voice echoed through the chamber once more. You will face trials beyond your comprehension, they intoned. You will be tested in ways you cannot yet understand, but only those who prove worthy will ascend, fail, and all will be lost. As the words hung in the air, Kincaid felt the gravity of the moment settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just a military campaign. This wasn't just about alliances and treaties. This was the beginning of a new era, a time when humanity and the Terivans, two fledgling species in a vast ancient galaxy, would have to prove their worth. Kincaid turned to her team, her expression one of resolve. Prepare yourselves. This is just the beginning. The trial of the Isknar awaits, and we must be ready. With that, the team left the chamber, and the shuttle returned to their respective fleets. The message was clear. The test had begun, and there was no turning back. The fleets gathered at the outer rim of the Isknar station, a collection of warships and vessels from both the human and Terivan fleets. Together, they prepared for the trials that would test their strength, intelligence, and resolve. These trials would push them to their limits, forcing them to confront not just external enemies, but also their own doubts and fears. As the fleets made their preparations, the first trial was revealed. The Iskanar had programmed a series of challenges, each more difficult than the last. The first challenge involved a battle against an enemy that was not of flesh and blood. The Iskanar had constructed an army of sentient machines, creatures made entirely of metal and energy, designed to test the fleet's tactical abilities, their cooperation, and their adaptability. Kincaid's mind raced as she analyzed the situation. This was no ordinary battle. These machines were unlike anything they had encountered before. They were faster, stronger, and more unpredictable than anything humanity had ever faced. But as she surveyed the battlefield, she felt something else. Something primal. This was their chance. This was the moment they had all been preparing for. Let's show them what humanity is capable of, she muttered to herself, her grip tightening around the command chair. With that, the first trial began. As the machines advanced, the fleet sprang into action, unleashing a barrage of firepower. The battle was intense, but it was clear that humanity and the Terivans had learned much from each other in their brief time together. The human ships provided the firepower, while the Terivan vessels used their intelligence and maneuverability to outthink the machines. It was a perfect synergy, a blending of strengths that had never been seen before. The trial was grueling, but they had won, and with each victory, they grew stronger, more united. But the trials weren't over. This was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, and the threats it held were even more dangerous than they had imagined. But now, humanity and the Terivans had something they had never had before: each other, and together, they would face whatever came next. As the fleets prepared for the next trial, Kincaid stared out into the vastness of space. The galaxy was a place of infinite possibility, but it was also one filled with unimaginable dangers. The Iskanar had warned them. Failure meant the destruction of everything they held dear. But Kincaid was undeterred. They had already overcome the first trial, and with every step, they were proving their worth. The galaxy's fate now rested in their hands. What would humanity and the Terivans do next? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. The future of the galaxy was in their hands. Would they rise to the challenge? Or would they fall to the darkness? The trial had just begun, and the fate of the galaxy was now in the hands of those brave enough to answer the call.